The room fell silent before the ink had even dried. King Charles had signed many royal instruments, but this order was different. It did not announce a celebration, grant an honor, or protect an ancient privilege. It officially terminated Camilla's future status within the line of succession arrangements, stripping away the authority and ceremonial position she had expected to retain. With one controlled signature, the monarch turned a private marital fracture into a constitutional earthquake. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles had summoned the Restricted Succession Council before the morning briefing, and everyone understood that secrecy was part of the warning. William sat opposite his father, while Princess Anne remained close to two constitutional advisors and the keeper of the Privy Seal. That ancient office safeguards the monarch's formal seal, the mark used to authenticate the crown's most serious decisions. No family discussion required it. The king lowered his eyes to the Royal Succession Continuity Order, a binding directive designed to control royal authority if a sovereign dies, becomes incapacitated, or abdicates. He signed. The decree formally terminated Camilla's future status, ceremonial precedence, access, and influence within succession-related duties. It also transferred emergency continuity powers directly to William and placed Anne in charge of enforcing the transition. Charles set the pen beside the page and said, "The crown must no longer depend upon personal arrangements." William noticed the monarch's hand tremble before it vanished beneath the table. The future king stayed still, but the movement exposed the truth. His father had not signed with relief, he had signed with pain. Anne saw it too, yet she remained composed, because hesitation now could weaken the order before Camilla even learned what had been done. Camilla received the sealed notice inside her private sitting room. She read the first page once, then again, as though repetition might change the meaning. It did not. The queen pushed her chair backwards so sharply that it struck the wall, then demanded to know whether Charles had approved the final language himself. When the aide answered yes, she fell silent and stared toward the closed door separating their apartments. The final handwritten clause delivered the deepest blow. Camilla could not challenge the order through household channels, private secretaries, or family intermediaries. Before the council dispersed, Anne told William that the Queen had not yet been informed about the immediate surrender of her private succession files. But while the palace struggled to understand the order's legal force, the people named within it were already confronting what the decision would cost them personally. Behind the constitutional language stood four people bound together by duty, memory, and years of unresolved resentment. Charles had acted as sovereign, but Camilla experienced the order as a wife. William saw protection for the future, yet also the destruction of his father's final domestic refuge. Catherine understood that new responsibility was approaching, and Princess Anne knew she had been selected to enforce a decision capable of splitting the family beyond repair. Charles had spent years balancing two identities that could no longer exist peacefully. As a husband, he had defended Camilla against public anger and private resistance. As monarch, he was responsible for ensuring that no unofficial power survived into William's reign. That future reign mattered, because a succession, the transfer of the crown from one sovereign to the next, could collapse into confusion if competing households claimed influence during the change. William stood alone outside the king's study, quietly rehearsing the words he knew would wound his father. The prince believed his future court had to be free from private loyalties, rival advisors, and anyone claiming authority simply because they had once stood close to Charles. When he entered, the monarch looked exhausted rather than commanding. Charles asked whether the order had gone too far. William paused, knowing that every word carried the weight of a son judging his father. "It is severe because the danger became severe," he replied. The king looked away. Beneath the prince's restraint, he heard the deeper accusation. Camilla's circle had become a threat, because Charles had failed to control it sooner. Camilla summoned Annabel Elliot, without waiting for palace approval. Her sister arrived expecting outrage, but the Queen spoke with painful calm. She asked whether the family had always believed her position would disappear with Charles. Annabel denied it, yet Camilla's voice finally broke when she repeated the words, "officially terminated." Her sister reached for her hand, but she pulled away, humiliated by the comfort. Catherine received confirmation that several continuity duties would now pass directly to her. Those duties were emergency responsibilities, designed to keep royal authority stable during illness, death, or abdication. The princess closed the folder instead of celebrating, and told William that gaining power through another woman's humiliation carried a dangerous emotional cost. He understood, but he also knew hesitation could reopen the threat. Anne had already warned Charles during a documented private briefing that delay could destroy the order. She feared Camilla's advisors might relocate, alter, or reinterpret sensitive succession correspondence. The king therefore made enforcement immediate, though he inserted one protection of his own. His wife would keep her residence and financial security. Camilla barely reacted to that mercy. Her shock had hardened into anger. She requested a private meeting with Charles and ordered that no aide enter the room. That confrontation would not begin with the order itself, but with the hidden incident that finally convinced Charles he could no longer protect both his wife and the crown. The succession order had not emerged from vague unease or a passing disagreement. It began with one forbidden meeting inside Clarence's house, a meeting Camilla believed would remain private. 3 weeks before Charles signed the decree, she gathered senior members of her household and discussed how her influence could continue after William inherited the throne. One sentence from that briefing reached the king. From that moment, protection became suspicion, and suspicion hardened into irreversible action. Camilla had expected her charities, advisors, and household office to retain direct access to the next sovereign after Charles's reign ended. That expectation mattered because a royal household is the private staff and administrative structure serving a senior royal. William had already insisted that every such office must be reorganized during succession, leaving no separate court capable of influencing him or Catherine from the shadows. The Queen called the gathering the Clarence House Continuity Briefing. A continuity briefing is a private meeting designed to prepare duties, staff, and responsibilities for a future change in reign. During that session, she instructed her private secretary to draft a proposal granting her permanent consultation rights over royal residences, ceremonial planning, and family appointments after William became king. Princess Anne entered unexpectedly after Charles sent her to retrieve a confidential file. Camilla closed the folder at once, but the king's sister had already heard the words that changed everything. Regardless of who wears the crown, Anne stopped in the doorway. The Queen tried to continue calmly, yet the silence around the table made the meaning impossible to hide. Anne confronted Camilla in the corridor moments later. She warned that no consort could create authority extending beyond the sovereign who had granted it. A consort is the spouse of a reigning monarch, holding status through marriage rather than independent rule. The Queen insisted she was protecting stability, not seizing power. Anne answered that stability imposed without William's consent was simply control, wearing a respectable name. Charles received his sister's written account that evening. The king read every line alone, removed his glasses, and remained motionless as midnight passed. Camilla, seeking reassurance, would not have broken him. Her planning a future power structure without telling him did. The monarch understood that secrecy had turned a personal fear into a constitutional threat. Charles ordered an audit of all succession correspondence. An audit is a formal examination of records to uncover hidden, altered, or unauthorized material. Advisors discovered draft letters prepared for future courtiers, explaining how Camilla's household might bypass William's office and preserve influence through personal loyalty. One draft invoked the king's wishes as permanent moral authority, pressuring the future sovereign to protect arrangements he had never approved. Charles first considered confronting his wife gently. Anne warned that delay would allow her advisors to transform a marital dispute into organized resistance. When husband and wife finally met without secretaries, courtiers, or constitutional language between them, years of loyalty collided with one devastating accusation. There were no advisors in the room when Camilla faced Charles. No official folders rested between them, and no courtier could soften what had happened. She entered, carrying the termination notice in one hand and the remains of their trust in the other. The king had expected anger. What he encountered was wounded disbelief. For the first time since taking the throne, he was forced to defend a sovereign decision, not before Parliament or the public, but before his wife. Camilla had refused the formal meeting room chosen by palace staff. She insisted that their marriage could not be discussed across a council table, the long official table used for royal decisions and formal briefings. Charles understood the challenge beneath that refusal. He dismissed every aide, ordered the doors closed, and removed the protection of protocol from the conversation. The Queen placed the succession notice on the table between them. "Did you sign this as my husband or as my king?" she asked. Charles did not look away. "I signed it because I could no longer separate the two." The answer struck harder than anger, because it confirmed that the man she trusted and the monarch who judged her had become the same person. Camilla accused William and Princess Anne of turning years of distrust into constitutional punishment. She claimed they had waited for one mistake and then used it to erase her future. The king rejected that defense. The Clarence House briefing, he said, had not been a careless discussion. It had been an organized attempt to preserve influence beyond his reign. Charles watched her expression harden. Camilla reminded him of the humiliation she had absorbed for decades, the public hostility she had endured, and the private battles she had survived to remain beside him. She said the crown had accepted her loyalty when it was useful, then discarded her once her presence became inconvenient. His composure broke for a moment, but he still refused to withdraw the order. The Queen reached into her handbag and removed a small palace key. She set it beside the decree and told him he had reduced their life together to rooms she could enter and duties she could no longer perform. Charles stared at the key, yet he did not return it. The king then revealed the evidence she had feared. A secure recording, commissioned during the succession audit, had captured part of the forbidden briefing. Such an audit is a formal review of royal records and communications, intended to expose hidden or unauthorized plans. Camilla realized he had heard her voice personally. Charles repeated the sentence that destroyed his remaining doubt. "William will need guidance, whether he requests it or not." The words had not come from an advisor. They had come from her. Camilla left without taking the key. William stood outside the library, silent and waiting. In that instant, she understood the conflict had moved from husband against wife to queen against heir. Yet the decision did not belong to emotion alone, because behind Charles's signature stood a carefully constructed alliance determined to make the termination impossible to reverse. Camilla still believed the order could be softened through persuasion, delay, or private loyalty. She underestimated how completely the ground beneath her had shifted. Charles may have signed the decree, but William and Princess Anne had built the structure, ensuring it could survive pressure from courtiers, relatives, and the Queen's household. Every route of appeal had been anticipated. Every sympathetic voice had been isolated. And at the center stood a king, visibly grieving the decision he refused to undo. William received control over succession planning, future household appointments, ceremonial continuity, and every emergency decision tied to the crown's transfer. Ceremonial continuity means the system used to keep official royal duties, public appearances, and constitutional functions running during a change of reign. The prince now held the authority Camilla had expected to influence from behind the scenes. Anne received an even sharper role. Charles appointed her royal continuity guardian, a temporary position giving her power to inspect files, limit access, and recover succession material held by another royal office. The Princess Royal entered Camilla's private office, carrying the inventory herself. Before speaking, she watched the Queen touch the edge of her desk, as though memorizing a life already being dismantled. Anne asked for the crimson succession boxes. Those locked containers held confidential papers concerning the future transfer of royal authority. Camilla replied that Charles had entrusted them to her personally. The king's sister did not soften. They were entrusted to the consort, she said. That office has now been terminated. Camilla accused Anne of waiting years for this humiliation. She claimed the princess had never accepted her place beside Charles and was now disguising revenge as duty. Anne rejected the attack without raising her voice. She said she was protecting William from obligations created without his knowledge, and from promises he had never agreed to honor. William later found Charles alone, holding an old photograph of himself and Camilla. The prince saw grief where authority had stood only hours earlier. He offered to postpone enforcement for 24 hours, hoping to give his father space to breathe. The king refused. Delay, he said, would turn sorrow into weakness, and weakness into negotiation. The audit then uncovered a private list of courtiers Camilla expected to retain after succession. Several names belonged to officials positioned inside residences controlled by William, creating a hidden network capable of bypassing his household. One note carried an even deeper insult. Catherine's name appeared beside the words, "unlikely to resist during transition." The future queen read the line in silence, then closed the file with controlled force. Camilla's circle had not merely planned around William, it had underestimated her. Catherine asked to meet Camilla directly, not as a wife or daughter-in-law, but as the woman expected to inherit the position she had just lost. Before that meeting could occur, the termination order began changing daily palace life, forcing Camilla to experience how quickly royal authority disappears once others stop recognizing it. The true force of the decree was not revealed through grand ceremony. It emerged through small refusals. A briefing removed from Camilla's diary. A red box redirected to William. A security officer asking for a key she had carried for years. Within hours, the Queen discovered that royal status does not vanish in a single dramatic instant. It disappears door by door, privilege by privilege, until familiar corridors begin to feel like foreign territory. Palace staff received revised instructions before sunrise. Camilla could continue approved public engagements, but she could no longer attend succession councils, review continuity papers, or send directions into William's household. A succession council is a restricted royal meeting that prepares the transfer of authority from one reign to the next. Losing access meant she was no longer part of the monarchy's future planning. The Queen's private office began shrinking immediately. Several advisors were placed on leave, and every letter concerning the next reign was transferred to the Prince and Princess of Wales. Camilla understood why that mattered. A royal office survives through access, information, and obedience. Once those three things disappear, the title may remain, but the power behind it is already gone. Camilla arrived for the morning royal briefing and stopped beside the table. Her usual chair was missing. She remained standing until a secretary quietly explained that the meeting was now restricted. The Queen did not argue. She turned away with controlled dignity, but inside the lift, she pressed the wrong floor twice before realizing what she had done. Charles saw her crossing the corridor alone. The king stepped forward instinctively, then froze when she passed, without acknowledging him. He gripped the back of a nearby chair, fighting the urge to follow. The monarch had protected the succession, yet each consequence now forced him to watch his wife experience the decision as rejection. William received Camilla's redirected red box later that morning. A red box is a locked case used to carry confidential royal papers. The prince rested his hand on it, but did not open it. Accepting the contents meant accepting the authority. It also meant confirming that her removal was no longer temporary, symbolic, or reversible. The tension deepened when an advisor discovered that one succession file was missing from the surrendered archive. It was the original continuity proposal, discussed during the forbidden Clarence House briefing. The absence suggested resistance, concealment, or something worse. Security records delivered the most disturbing revelation. Camilla had not removed the file. Someone had taken it hours earlier, using credentials assigned to a member of Charles's own office. The king ordered the access list sealed, while William demanded that no one leave the palace until the record was checked. Catherine requested her private meeting with Camilla at once. The princess believed the missing document could expose a final act of resistance, or prove that the queen had been betrayed by the very circle she tried to protect. With the palace preparing for another confrontation, two women entered a room alone, and what passed between them changed the meaning of the entire crisis. Catherine did not meet Camilla to celebrate a victory. She entered knowing that one woman's future authority had been built upon another woman's removal. There were no secretaries, no recording devices, and no husbands to control the conversation. For the first time since the order was signed, Camilla faced someone who neither accused nor defended her. Catherine simply asked what she had intended to protect, and the answer exposed a truth more painful than ambition alone. Catherine chose a small morning room instead of an official office, removing the formal symbols that could turn the meeting into an interrogation. A morning room is a private sitting space used for quiet family conversations, rather than public business. Camilla arrived expecting demands about the missing file, but the princess began by admitting that the termination had been personally devastating, whatever its constitutional purpose. Catherine poured the tea herself and waited until the silence became impossible to avoid. Then she asked, "Were you trying to control William, or were you afraid of becoming invisible?" Camilla's expression changed. The queen looked down and admitted that the two fears had become impossible to separate. Camilla confessed that Charles's death or incapacity would not simply end her authority. In her mind, it would erase every sacrifice, every insult, and every year she had endured to stand beside him. She had convinced herself that preserving influence meant preserving meaning. Catherine listened without interruption, but she did not soften the truth. The princess told her that permanence could not be taken from a future monarch through private planning. William's reign had to begin with his own authority, not with promises created by another household. Catherine promised that Camilla's charitable legacy would be protected through a formal transition. But the queen's power could not survive independently of Charles. Camilla then revealed the source of the missing document through a private spoken confession. Her senior private secretary had removed the file without permission and hidden it inside a secure cabinet at Clarence House. The advisor intended to use it as leverage against William and Princess Anne if the termination order remained in force. Catherine sent the location directly to palace security. The recovered proposal contained pressure tactics aimed at the future king, including coordinated resignations by loyal courtiers if Camilla's access was denied. The plan was no longer about reassurance. It was an organized attempt to make refusal painful. Camilla read the evidence and made her choice. Rather than defend the advisor, she signed a written statement accepting the termination order and dismissing every staff member involved in the scheme. The queen's signature did not restore her authority, but it ended the resistance built in her name. Catherine carried the signed statement to Charles. Yet before the king could respond, the public had already learned that Camilla's status was officially terminated. The private struggle was finally ending. Yet outside the gates, one image transformed a family rupture into the most discussed royal decision of the reign. By midday, the decision no longer belonged to the royal family. It belonged to millions of people reading the same extraordinary words: Camilla's status terminated by King's succession order. Supporters called it constitutional discipline. Critics described it as a brutal rejection of the woman Charles had spent decades defending. Yet the most powerful public reaction did not come from a commentator. It came from a silent crowd gathered outside Buckingham Palace, watching one royal flag remain unchanged. Broadcasters interrupted regular programming to explain the distinction. Camilla remained Charles's wife and current consort, but her succession-related status, future authority, and continuity privileges had officially ended. A consort is the spouse of a reigning monarch, holding position through marriage rather than independent sovereign power. The decision, therefore, did not remove her from the present reign. It removed her from the structure that would shape the next one. Palace Communications released a precise statement minutes later. It described the order as protection for a smooth transition to William, avoiding personal criticism while confirming that the decision was final. That mattered, because any hint of uncertainty could encourage resistance inside the household and deepen public confusion about who would control the monarchy after Charles. Outside Buckingham Palace, a newspaper seller raised a front page showing the king's signature beside the headline, "The King Chooses the Future." A crowd gathered beneath the balcony, reading in silence. An elderly woman placed a small bouquet near the gates, with a note saying, "Duty has a price." Nearby, another voice called the order needlessly cruel. William watched the coverage from Kensington Palace with Catherine. When a presenter described him as the victor, the prince switched off the television. "There was no victory in that room," he said. The princess understood. He had gained uncontested authority, but only through his father's grief and Camilla's humiliation. Charles heard commentators accuse him of abandoning his wife to protect his legacy. The king asked Princess Anne whether history would understand the difference between punishment and prevention. She answered that history would judge the evidence, but families would remember the pain. Camilla's signed acceptance statement changed the mood. Released through a documented palace announcement, it confirmed that she would not challenge the order, and had dismissed the advisors behind the hidden continuity scheme. The Queen also declared that the crown's future must belong entirely to William and Catherine, free from rival influence or inherited private obligations. Public anger began to soften, but the personal damage remained. That evening, Charles requested one final family meeting, not to renegotiate the order, but to decide how Camilla would stand beside him after losing the future she once expected. The constitutional battle had been settled. What remained was the harder judgment of whether a marriage, a family, and a monarchy could survive the truth it had exposed. The final meeting did not reverse the order. It did something more difficult. It forced every person involved to accept what could never be restored. Camilla would remain beside Charles as his wife and queen during his reign, but she would hold no authority over the succession that followed. William would inherit a crown cleared of competing influence. Catherine would inherit responsibility without triumph. And Charles would live with the knowledge that preserving the monarchy required ending his wife's royal future. Charles gathered Camilla, William, Catherine, and Princess Anne in the same room where the royal succession continuity order had first been approved. That order was the binding decree that removed the Queen's future succession authority and transferred control of the next reign to the prince. Everyone understood why returning to that room mattered. It forced the family to confront the decision at the place where private loyalty had first been defeated by royal duty. The king opened with no attempt to soften the truth. The decree was permanent, legally secured, and already being enforced. There would be no revised clause, delayed timetable, or private exception. Camilla listened without protest. William watched his father carefully, while Catherine remained beside him, and Anne kept the recovered file closed in front of her. Charles then lifted the small palace key Camilla had left beside the order. He placed it in her hand and gently closed her fingers around it. Their marriage remained, he told her, even though her succession authority did not. The Queen finally acknowledged that fear of being erased had allowed advisors to turn personal insecurity into an unacceptable claim over William's future reign. William promised Camilla dignity throughout Charles's lifetime and recognition for her public service. The prince made one boundary equally clear. His future court would answer to no previous household, private network, or inherited demand. She accepted his words because resistance had already cost too much. Catherine confirmed that Camilla's principal charities would receive a structured transition rather than sudden abandonment. A structured transition is an organized handover that protects staff, funding, and vulnerable people while authority changes. The princess refused to let innocent beneficiaries suffer because the palace had been divided. Anne closed the recovered succession file and secured it inside the official archive, the protected collection where permanent royal records are preserved. The Princess Royal then announced that every unauthorized continuity arrangement had been cancelled. Charles delivered the final truth through a documented family statement prepared after the meeting. The order had not been written to erase Camilla. It had been written to stop love, guilt, and private loyalty from becoming permanent instruments of royal power. Camilla lost the future status she tried to preserve, but regained dignity by accepting the boundary she crossed. William received undisputed authority without celebrating her fall. Charles protected the succession at the cost of domestic trust. The monarchy emerged wounded, but clearer. The order ended Camilla's constitutional future, secured William's uncontested succession, and proved that when love and monarchy demand opposing loyalties, the crown survives only when duty is chosen and the personal cost is accepted in full. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.